Hey guys, if you are joining us, we are recording this, so if you don't want yourself shown, please just hide your your camera, and you'll have access to this. The people that are on the call have access to this on YouTube thereafter. People who aren't here won't. But what we'd ask is, we understand you guys probably have a lot of questions. If you just save them for the end, if you want to pop any questions that you've got in the question box, and we'll answer them. So if, like, let's say Clara's doing a bit, you've got a question for Clara, just pop it in the box, say question for Clara, and at the end we'll just get to it. But just the usual disclaimer that I would kind of say with everything we'll speak about will be sort of in the hypothetical. So if you are, thinking about doing a prep yourself or post show or some things we'll speak about, please contact a fitness professional. And do not take anything we say as absolute, please. But that's just the ins and outs of what we've got to say. Clara will kick us off, and then I'll come in and I'll finish. So, Clara, if you want to get us started, that'd be fab.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you everyone for coming as always. It's super, super appreciated. We've not done one of these in ages. And today we're going to be talking about post prep and specifically kind of talking about the management of body changes after finishing a long dieting phase. So we'll probably be talking about it in the context of like competition prep, but this applies to anyone who's done a photo shoot or who's dieted for an extended period of time. I'll be specifically talking about the psychology and the mindset aspect of all of this, and kind of to cover this area, I'm kind of putting my psychologist hat on. So I am a trainee exercise psychologist, but I've also got the experience of a coach as well as a competitor. So everything that I'm talking about is very much evidence-based. And it's just to bring about the actual perspective of like, well, why is it that everyone talks about how difficult it is to finish a prep? Like, what is it about it that becomes so freaking mentally challenging that this is like a thing that we are now having a webinar on? Well, not to state the obvious, and I won't dwell on this for too long, but there are massive psychological risks associated with prolonged weight loss and prolonged dieting phases. Just off the back of having to focus all of your attention on counting your calories, counting your macros, paying attention to your physical activity, cardio, steps, training, the likes of it, that presents in and of itself a risk for heightened awareness around these things, and also leads to greater levels of anxiety in response to it, as well as in response to potential changes that could occur in these things. So you can only imagine if you have been super rigid with your food, with your exercise for, upwards of 18 weeks, gradually having to change that and moving to a more flexible approach in which your body then starts to change alongside it too, that can be incredibly challenging for people. Alongside that, when you're prepping, you will probably develop a very skewed body image. Everyone's heard of prep brain, everyone's heard of prep goggles, where you basically don't really see your body for what it actually is. So you might not realize how lean you truly are. And this becomes a lot more prevalent after people have competed, because you probably have become very used to feeling like kind of empty or like not feeling full at all, and then suddenly you start to eat more food, you feel full for the first time, and in your mind you feel like you've completely ballooned, and you tend to start to see your body image in a completely distorted way. Anyone who's competed before will probably have had this experience where maybe 2 or 3 weeks post show, and you're checking in and you're looking at your pictures and you feel like fat as fuck. And then maybe like 3 or 4 months down the line, you look back at those pictures and you cannot believe that you actually thought you were fat when you were still peeled to the bone. So that in itself, again, makes things really challenging in that post-show phase and in that moment of having to gain body weight back. Another big reason why it is so mentally challenging is because there's a lot of personal satisfaction that comes from being able to get shredded. You get very used to putting in the effort and reaping the reward of getting lean. And therefore, when you need to almost like reverse that process and start eating more and almost like start losing that reward feedback, again, that becomes really challenging because you can end up thinking that, maybe you're failing, even though you know that your goal isn't to get lean. It can feel like a bit of a failure. And that is also because you probably have gotten very used to getting a lot of praise and external rewards, like people liking your pictures, people giving a shit about your prep for a very long time. And you might start to feel like if you start gaining body fat, people are going to stop caring. You might lose your relevance. People are going to stop thinking that you're great at what you do. You're no longer as health and fitness as you think you were, etc., etc. So that's kind of the obvious reasons as to why it's really challenging. And again, another one to add in there is that prep demands that we have a very single-minded goal focus. It does require a lot of attention, particularly at the back end of it. So again, you can only imagine losing that single goal, and then having to move on to something else, or having to carry on with your life, whether you work in the fitness industry or not. That again makes it really, really hard. So aside from that, we're not here to talk about, the actual challenges of coming out of prep. We're here to talk about the things that we can actually do in response to them. So I'm going to focus on 4 key areas that I personally think are really important. And whether you're listening to this as a client, as someone who has competed before, as someone who intends to compete, or as a coach, you can use these accordingly with your clients or with yourself as we go along that. So the first thing I want to talk about is identity. So again, this might surprise you, it might not surprise you, but working on your identity before prep, during prep, and after prep can make the process of gaining body fat a lot easier. And why is that? Well, obviously, as I said before, when you are prepping, it just becomes almost like a part of your personality. And for a lot of people, when they very much get into the gist of competing, they start to drop other aspects of their life. So if we can imagine our identity as a table depicted here, it might just be that prep, and bodybuilding or being lean becomes their only leg under their identity table, and they completely neglect everything else that might come underneath it. Now, obviously, we do at some points need to bracket some of the other things that we do during prep because we just don't maybe have as much time, all of our attention to be able to do it. Excuse the dog. But come on, Archie. Sorry, guys. But it's really important that before prep even starts, we start to really nurture all the other aspects of our identity so that that process of gaining body fat again after prep is a heck of a lot easier. So there's a few things that you can do to be able to mitigate the negative effect of gaining weight on your personality, on your identity, and making it less distressing for you. The main thing I would say is that before you even start prep, it's really thinking about the things that make you you. And thinking about what other legs come under that identity table. And what that will allow you to do is during prep, be able to notice that there are other things that make you who you are. And when prep obviously ends, be able to double down and lean on them. Another reason why it's really important to have those other legs under that table is because when prep is finished, it doesn't mean that you fall off a cliff, because you can start to think about what it is about being in this like rigid, like disciplined environment you really enjoy, and perhaps even think about how you can bring some of those skills or some of the traits that the sport demands into the other areas of your life, so that it doesn't feel like you're losing a whole part of who you are just by gaining a bit of body weight. So really nurturing that identity before you start prep, during prep, and after prep can make a massive difference, because it will make it will allow you to separate who you are from that physique that you inevitably have to let go of, because as we all know, it's completely unsustainable to stay lean forever. Now, some of you might be listening to this and thinking, okay, I get it. I need to modify my identity. I need to embrace gaining weight, and that's all fine and well, but I still feel like a fat piece of shit when I start gaining weight. That might be something that particularly self-critical people start to say to themselves, and I put my hand up and say that I'm the first to do that, and Vaughan can attest to that after working with me for the best part of 4 years and 3 preps. He knows that I really, really struggle with this, and actually I'm quite critical of myself. And it's something that we tend to see a lot with perfectionists or people who do have those self-critical tendencies, is that even though they know and they logically understand that it's important to embrace the weight gain, that you need to bodybuild in order to bodybuild, it can be really challenging to not get completely crippled by those negative thought processes. Whether or not they impact on what we actually do is a different story. So it might be that for some people, they feel terrible in their skin, but it doesn't stop them from, continuing to show up at the gym, continue to track their meals. But for other people, it does actually have a really big impact. And they end up getting really tangled up. They lose their motivation for training. Everything goes to shit after prep. And that's where we really want to be able to create some acceptance and some diffusion. Now, what I mean by diffusion is just like space, metaphorical space between our thoughts and our feelings and how we do or how we respond to them. So let me take you through this really weird diagram that you've got on the screen here, which I call the choice point. So the choice point essentially just depicts a situation, a thought or a feeling that we find particularly triggering. So if we think about in the context of gaining weight after prep, it might be that we are maybe 3 or 4 kilos above stage weight, and a particular pair of jeans that we bought when we were shredded no longer fit us. And we suddenly find that incredibly triggering because we start to feel really fat. So if we're feeling really fat and we notice that sort of feeling show up, and we really focus all of our attention on it, if we really fuse with that thought, what can often happen is that we get hooked by it and we get really tangled up in it. We can get overwhelmed, and we can end up moving further away from our actual goals or from our identity, even as a bodybuilder. It can often actually present as, binge eating, as not going to the gym, losing all motivation to like do our steps, to, eat vegetables, to do any cardio at all. But it's really important that we notice that feeling, because what we can do as a result of that noticing is create a bit of space. So let's take the example that I used of feeling fat, right? And you might just be really, really tangled up in this like uncomfortable feeling of just feeling fat and all the other negative connotations that perhaps come with that feeling. What diffusion would then look like in practice in that moment would be to change that "I feel fat" sentence that your mind is telling you to "I'm having the thought or the feeling that I'm feeling fat," and then paraphrasing it again to saying "I'm noticing that I'm having the thought or the feeling that I'm feeling fat." And now what we're doing is we're not trying to get rid of that thought or that feeling, because arguing with our mind is probably not going to be very productive at all. If I sit there and start to argue with myself, well, actually, you're not fat because this and that, my mind's going to go, well, actually, you have gained body fat, so stop lying to yourself. And it will just end up in a really unproductive back and forth that wouldn't go anywhere. So instead of trying to get rid of the thought, if we simply go from having a really aggressive in our face to paraphrasing it and changing it from "I feel fat" to "I'm noticing that I'm feeling fat," it can just give us enough breathing space to start to acknowledge that the way that we're speaking to ourselves perhaps in this moment is really not helpful. And that if we do get really tangled up in those thoughts, we end up doing things that aren't even aligned with our identity or our values as bodybuilders. So off the back of that, we can start to maybe accept that we might have some of these feelings show up at times, but that ultimately we can start to consider those voices in our mind as just maybe like really helpful advisors. Because suppose that if post-show I start telling myself that I'm feeling really fat, and that I'm gross, and that I'm this and that I'm that, if I sit and I listen and I ruminate on that, it's very likely that, like I said, my motivation to train is going to disappear. I'm probably going to end up wanting to eat a load of crap because I feel like crap, and then there's like that cycle continues. And that would only happen if I really listened to that voice in my head and pay all my attention to it. But if I think about that voice in my head as a really helpful advisor, a terrible friend, or even if considering my emotions as emotional tools, as helpful tools that give me information, I can start to see these things slightly differently. They're not as aggressive. It's a bit more distant. It's not who I am. Again, if the voice inside my head is just an imaginary terrible friend, I can tell that imaginary terrible friend to fuck off and not necessarily get all tangled up in what it's saying. And that just allows me to accept that maybe I will feel a little bit uncomfortable in this process, but it also allows me to note my intention and how I'd like to actually respond in relation to those thoughts and feelings. Do I want to, at that choice point, at that point of feeling really uncomfortable, do I want to like marinate in it? Do I want to feel even worse about myself by continuing to eat a bunch of crap? Or do I want to notice that feeling and despite it still go to the gym because that's something that I value and that's something that matters to me? It's very likely that that is the case. And so when we think about accepting the way that we feel and perhaps creating a bit of space between the thoughts and the feelings that we have, what it allows us to do is to show up and behave in alignment with our values. And that ties back to our identity, because our identity will ultimately be a presentation of who we are, what matters to us. And for most of us who compete in bodybuilding, who take part in this, who diet, who like shaping our physiques all the time, it is very likely that, you know, health really matters to us. And ultimately, if we get really tangled up in those awful critical thoughts, we're probably going to end up doing things that pull us further away from like achieving that physique, achieving like a healthy life, for example. And actually, when we can create a bit of distance and not get too tangled up in it, we can move towards the things that actually matter to us. So I appreciate that's a little bit wordy. So if anyone does have any questions, like feel free to drop them in the question box and I can answer them later. And I suppose like tied into acceptance and diffusion comes the idea of self-compassion, which again is an idea or like a concept that gets thrown about all the time in the fitness industry. Like some of you might be rolling your eyes thinking, oh my God, not again, this fucking concept, like who gives a shit? But it's really, really important actually. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that having proper building blocks of self-compassion and being aware of them can make a massive difference to our experience of, you know, gaining body fat and kind of tackling some of the discomfort that comes with that process too. So again, I'm thinking very much here in relation to self-critical thoughts that might show up, or self-berating kind of experiences that we might have, or even just like feelings of discomfort in our clothes in response or as a result of gaining body fat. And these are the kind of main 6 building blocks of self-compassion that typically tend to be used in psychology to support people through situations in which being critical of themselves really isn't helpful. And again, self-compassion isn't being all nicey and like not giving a crap and like eating ice cream 7 times a day. It's very different. It's very much about noticing what we need and trying to tend to those needs or repair them. So if we think of this as an actual real life example, imagine that you are a competitor and you step off stage and maybe you didn't do your best in your routine. And you have a really critical coach who comes up to you and tells you that you perform terribly and that they're embarrassed of you. It's very likely that you won't be very motivated to perform well next time, or that your motivation will be very much dependent on the person, like the coach, not for yourself. On the contrary, if you performed really badly and your coach came up to you and told you that you were amazing and they were actually bullshitting you, it wouldn't give you any appropriate feedback to be able to improve on. And so the compassionate response would be one of acknowledging that maybe you didn't do a great job, but of providing help and sufficient nurture that you're inspired to continue forward. And the same goes for when we apply this idea of self-compassion to ourselves. When we're struggling to gain body weight, or when we're struggling with how our body changes after being completely shredded, it's really important that we don't completely criticize ourselves, but that we also don't just like turn a blind eye to the reality of our body changing. And so if you look at these 6 building blocks here, you can yourself start to think of what maybe goes in each box for you. So I'll talk you through each one of them, just so you've got a bit of an idea in case like the words are a bit don't make a lot of sense. But the first one over here, acknowledging the wound, simply means acknowledging the fact that gaining body fat can be really hard. It's really easy to get caught up on like watching people on Instagram, like totally embracing their like, you know, hashtag thick bodies. And it's amazing that we've got that, but it doesn't take away the fact that it can actually be really challenging to see your body change. And so acknowledging that is the first step to actually allowing yourself to move through it. The second thing over here is be human, just realizing that it's normal to feel discomfort and that we can't actually avoid going through this process of having to gain body fat again. So instead of avoiding it, if we turn towards it and if we lean towards it, we can start to experience the exciting parts of being human, feeling human after prep, and start putting that energy into the likes of our training, into the likes of having more energy to socialize with other people. Disarming the critic very much relates to the previous slide where I was talking about, accepting and diffusing from some of those really challenging thoughts, finding ways to counteract those critical voices without ignoring them, but simply, not letting them completely take over your mind. Using an acceptance and diffusion can help build that compassion in there. Holding yourself kindly is, again, as the name would explain, is not berating yourself for simply being human. You would never, if you've made bikini girl friends, for example, at a show, and one of them messaged you like 3 days post-show and told you that they couldn't stop eating and that they'd eaten a whole tub of Lotus Biscoff, you wouldn't turn around and call them a fat fuck, or say that you're embarrassed of them. So why would you ever do that to yourself? Related to that, it's seeing yourself in others and realizing that we all go through this experience. I think every single competitor probably has gone through at least an experience of like seeing their body change really, really fast post show and going, oh, well, that's a bit fucking strange. Whether they found it particularly difficult or not, we've all been there and we've all made our own mistakes, and we'll touch upon those actually later on in today's webinar. So you're not alone. Speak to other people and acknowledge that, it's a completely normal part of this process. And finally, make space for those thoughts and feelings. So rather than trying to ignore them, rather than trying to pretend that you're totally fine, that you've got everything under control, allow yourself the permission to actually, appreciate that gaining weight can really be challenging at times. And it's okay to find it difficult. You don't have to love your, thicker body straight away, as long as you commit to compassionately working towards that. And the final thing I wanted to touch upon, I believe this is my final point. It's mindfulness. And everyone will have heard this over and over again. It's become super popular in the fitness industry. But being mindful in the process of prep can help us in the process of post-prep with our weight gain. The reason being is because when we, as you all know probably, when we go through a really rigid dieting phase, we have to get very good at ignoring our hunger and satiety senses, because you'll never be satisfied and you'll always be hungry, but you actually need to just get on with your life and function. So we become very, very good at ignoring how we actually feel. And so practicing mindfulness, even just before we start prep, through prep, and at the end of prep, can help us ground ourselves in that process of getting back in touch with those thoughts and feelings. Now, I've put the hunger scale on the screen here just because I think that it's such a valuable tool for people to use or to learn to use during prep, for after prep. Bearing in mind that when you are on prep, like, you're never going to be fully satisfied, or like you're never going to be stuffed after a meal, but getting used to actually being a little bit more attuned to how you feel before a meal or after a meal proves to be a very useful tool when you no longer have to stick to a specific amount of calories, to start to learn what your actual hunger and satiety cues are in your body. Because as I said, if you've been ignoring them very well, because you have to, for 4.5 months, coming out of that, you will feel like a bottomless pit. And if you don't know when to stop eating, you will probably make yourself sick at some point. And I think, I certainly have eaten to the point of feeling like I'm about to boke post-show. And a lot of people have been through that experience too. And that is because that aspect of mindfulness was missing. So whether you are prepping or not, if you're a coach, I honestly really encourage you to use something like a hunger scale with yourself, with your clients, anybody who tends to struggle with overeating after dieting phases or overeating full stop. And then I've got a little wave and an anchor here, just because the practice of mindfulness, it doesn't have to be like sit with your eyes closed and, say for 5 minutes straight in one breath. Being mindful is very much about noticing all those emotions that will show up in the process of post-show, and finding ways to navigate that wave, but also to anchor yourself. And this is where having a coach, having a team, having friends that you've met through this process can be so important, because that can really bring you back to earth. And it can very much remind you that irrespective of how your body is changing, you're still you, and the things that make you you, i.e. kind of going back to that identity, don't necessarily change just because your physique is changing. So those are some of the psychological tools that you can implement from my end. If anyone, like I said, has got any more questions or would like to discuss them further with me, pop a comment in the box and we can chat about it later on. But other than that, I'll pass over to you, Vaughan.
Thank you very much. For those of you, I need to apologise. I sound a little bit nasally, so I'm not going to sound as posh and as well spoken as maybe Clara did. But then you're going to get something way worse after me, which is Ali Burge. So I might actually sound like a proper gentleman compared to him. But it's my job to just kind of go through a little bit of, if you are a coach, maybe you're being coached by someone, maybe you're doing your own thing, or to what would you do with food post show? Some of you that are my clients are in prep. What's it going to look like? What's your training going to look like? I'll touch a little bit on PEDs and drugs, although it doesn't seem like there's many people at all on this webinar that are maybe using. But I understand that there's a few that I'll be watching this after, so I will go through that, but I might just sort of skip through it quickly. So, as Clara said, you've been doing really, really well at avoiding your sort of cravings and not giving in to them. At least I hope you've done if you've had a successful prep. But you need to remember that your cravings and your food focus is going to be so high. Like you thought it was high before you finish a meal, and then all of a sudden all you can think about is the next one. You will not be able to get through that like meal without thinking, I need to be full by the time I finish this. And this is the kind of thing where you've got all these sort of cravings, these, oh my God, I can't wait to have that jar of Biscoff. I can't wait to have that donut from that place, that KFC, whatever it is. You're going to need to allow yourself some time post-show to, I'd say, relax on your diet and understand that you won't get fat overnight, right? You can gain fat very, very quickly, and I'll kind of get into this. But I think that allowing yourself the freedom, 2 or 3 days, probably more towards 3 days, sometimes more, to have those foods, to maybe, have meals with your partner, your friends, significant others, is a must. I don't care what anyone says. Now, it's different maybe if you're someone that's got like back-to-back shows, like that's way different. What I'm talking about in this instance is once you're completely finished your season. So for me last year, I had 4 shows on the bounce. After each one, I ate protein and veg the rest of the day. You know what I mean? So I'm talking about like, okay, I didn't do that after my very last show. This is kind of what I'm referring to. So ideally after those sort of like 2, 3, 4 days, whatever it is, you want to be kind of getting back on some sort of plan ASAP. And I guess it kind of comes from what Clara was saying about your identity. If you were someone that was very like, I'm a bodybuilder through and through, well, as bodybuilders, we eat, X amount of times a day, chicken and veg, whatever it is, etc., etc. So that, I would assume, should help with kind of what Clara was saying about regaining your identity, right? Now, where are you going to go with food? Now, there's such a big paradigm really between female natural bikini girls and male assisted bodybuilders and how much more food the guys will get away with. And hey, it's unfair, but we take a lot of gear and it's just the way it is, right? So from where you're at, you're probably going to see roughly anywhere between a 5, 6, maybe a 700 calorie increase per day if you're a female. And if you're a guy, I have some guys easily go more than 1,000, but maybe they're really, really well muscled. You have to remember that your body is so responsive at this stage. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to ensure that like a month after you finished your show, you're in a better position than you were when you started dieting. I have seen some people be in a way worse position 2 weeks post-show than they were at the start of dieting, and ultimately have to diet again. So these are just something which is horrendous, totally terrible. You don't want to do that. So what I'm suggesting is, speaking from experience now, if you were to go less than that of an increase, I honestly don't think you'd stick to it. It's not enough to keep your hunger at bay. But then again, you've got this, again, a little bit of a, okay, I can go aggressive and I can go, Vaughan, actually, I'm going to have 700 or 800 calories more. I'm a female bikini girl. That's cool. But what if you then binge on top of that? Then that's not good, right? So my sort of like, my method is ramp your food up to the point where you don't overeat, because then we're saving calories. But everyone knows after the first time they compete, and Ali will show you an example of him, we go for it. We do. I very rarely know anyone that's competed for the first time and not had some problems sticking to their food plan in that first initial sort of couple of weeks. You're human. You're allowed to. But what I need you to understand is that if you go for it in those few days post-show, like, you're going to retain a lot of water. And it's not that feeling of, okay, I'm thinking that I'm acknowledging that I'm feeling fat. You're just going to have a heck of a lot of water retention because you've restricted your carbohydrates for a long time. You've maybe also consumed a large amount of salt that maybe wasn't way above your normal daily intake. And as I said, because your body's so responsive, this is why you hold fluid, you accumulate, and you feel a little bit, well, maybe more than a little bit watery, like a lot watery. Did you click the next slide there? That's good. That's cool. That's fine. I felt like I was doing a little bit like a matrix sort of thing. There was like a glitch, but that's okay. But a lot of you that are listening to this will maybe perhaps, well, okay, maybe I'm not going to say 50-50 split, but following a meal plan, if it fits your macros. Whatever you are doing, the whole rule of thumb applies of, right, okay, 500-600 more for the females, maybe 8 to 1,000 more for the guys. But again, it's sort of like situational dependent, isn't it? You might be someone that is towards the back end of prep, you are not working, and then all of a sudden you go back into a really labor intensive job. So those guys, if that changes, they're going to need a lot more food. What I do is, if you are doing fish and macros, I suggest that you have like 3 meals or so that are kind of similar to your prep food or exactly the same. So if you usually eat eggs and ham in the morning, have eggs and ham. Usually have oats and whey pre-workout, have that. And then have another couple of, like, I'm not going to say free meals, but what I mean by the word free is like allow yourself an opportunity to put something in there that would stop you binging. So if you feel like, actually, Vaughan, I can't go back on a 5 meal plan so rigid, because that 4th meal, I just want Biscoff, or I just want chocolate spread or Nutella like at night. I'm like, cool, well, just put Nutella in one night and have a pancake with it. And then the next night, I was wanting lemon curd, right? Fuck, there's a throwback. But so I had a bit of lemon curd. That's absolutely fine. The end of the day, adherence will trump what's optimal. I'm not saying go away and have all your calories from like Biscoff and shit, but I'm just trying to help you find a solution to what we have been through and know is the continual feeling of just give me all the food right now, and oh my God, I can't stop eating, I can't stop putting it down. As I said, we've been there. And if anyone's listening to this and you're in that point, it gets easier. Trust me, it really does. Like your first prep, you feel like, oh my God, I'm never going to compete again if this is the case. It's the worst experience of my life. See, the second time you do it, no bother. 3rd time, piece of piss. 4th time, robot. It's fine. Always, if you're getting back on plan, include a free meal. I don't like to call it a cheat meal. Free meal across the week. Something you can kind of shoot for, something to look forward to, rather than every day being an off-plan day. Or every day, that's what people do post-show, and I recommend not to do. They say, oh yeah, show's on the Sunday, and then I'm fucking going for it. The Monday, I've got dinner out with my mum. The Tuesday, dinner out with my dad. The Wednesday, dinner out with my pals. The Thursday, dinner out with my other pals. And it's like every single night after the show. Like, you didn't do that. So if you're wondering why you're maybe on the toilet constantly, your digestive system is just not thanking you because it's not had any of those sort of food sources. So I suggest, put in that free meal, of course, but to try and ensure it doesn't turn into a binge, and use maybe Clara's scale about, okay, right, I've had some cookies, that's cool, but I don't need the ice cream, the kebab, the Domino's, the Doritos and everything else on top. Allow yourself to say, right, I'm going to go to Tesco's, I'm going to buy a bag of Doritos, I'm going to finish it, I'm going to eat the whole fucking family thing, but that's all I'm going to have. Don't have it in the house. And as I said, if you do overeat, it's not the end of the world. Don't feel incredibly guilty. I know for certain, when I put myself back in the situation, I did post-show. I remember I had to phone my coach and I was like, James, I'm so embarrassed. I can't stick to this. And I felt incredibly guilty for it. But at the time, it was natural. See, when you look back, and I've done it 2, 3, 4 times, it's like, of course I was like that. It was my first time competing. Right? We're not saying that this is going to happen. We're just trying to say, well, here's our experiences and here's what you could do to try and make sure you don't fuck up as much as me or Ali did. And I think that maybe communication with your coach is really key. I've got a couple of girls on here that maybe ended prep not too long ago, and they continue to check in 3 times a week and would usually message me out with that as well. Just to make sure we were right, speaking about it. Maybe they had a snack accident, something happened, they would talk about it. They weren't just trying to hide, because this is the thing. You've maybe checked in with your coach daily in the final sort of maybe 4, 5, 6 weeks because you're doing futures back to back, to then all of a sudden go to nothing. Then you start struggling with binging, or overeating, feeling guilty, struggling with mental health or whatnot, like to not have any support after having so much is not great. So I always say, look, message me if whenever you need me, but at the same time, don't feel guilty about messing me out with that, blah, 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 just like you did on prep. Clara, flick, if you could. There we go. So we've spoken a little bit about what to do with food. For anyone that's wondering about sodium or anything like that, just go right back up to where sodium was prior to competing. Now, the thing is, right, I've said there that the first one to deload post-show pretty much instantly. It's not something. Is it something that I do myself? No, but it's because usually post-show, like 2 or 3 weeks after, we have, let's say me and my wife, family have like a trip planned away. So I always go, right, I'll just hold on to there. But you're going to need to do this at some point. So I suggest just doing it quite like earlier to give your body a break and to wash away like the months and months and build up of dietary-induced fatigue or neural fatigue. Is a fancy word thrown around. It's just our nervous system can become quite fatigued from what we do in prep. And the only way to offset that is to rest. So I would have a break. It's a bit of a mental break as well. Like such a build up. If you do a few shows back to back, you just need that bit of a break post-show. It can lead you to feeling very lost very quickly. I promise you when you get back to training, you'll feel fine. Now, off of just the back of more food, right, and better sleep and less stress, your training performance will skyrocket. Absolutely skyrocket. You will feel like an absolute Hulk, whereas before you come peak week or the week before, you maybe felt like Minnie Mouse, right? Kind of like the differences in strength between me and Ali. That's maybe how you've been feeling. But what I'll say is you will very quickly find the love for training again. And instinctively, because of who you are, and you're on this webinar, you're watching this, you'll want to fucking push the weight on the bar up. You'll be like, oh my fucking God, get another 20 on the end of that hack squat right now. When we have to have a few considerations first before we do that, right? I get it. I get excited too. I'm in the set and, the boys are there and they're like, fuck it, yeah, you can do a bit more. And, you do stupid shit, but you learn from it. So considerations we need to have. We may have gained a ton of water from what we've kind of eaten and been feeling pretty bloated. And the scale weight looks like, oh my God, we must have gained a lot of fat quite quickly. When in reality, body fat, like surrounding connective tissue, is still relatively low, right? So one of the key concerns is there's quite a high chance of injury risk, right? So let's say you're on like, what's connective tissue, Vaughan? It's the stuff, knees, joints, tendons, ligaments, all the tissue that's surrounding that's connecting muscle and bone. So the one thing that protects that cushions that, is body fat. And you don't have much of it, right? But mentally, you've got fucking 8 hours of sleep, you've got a belly full of oats and biscoff, and the boys or the girls are telling you, let's fucking go, right? It can be hard to just back off a little bit, but I'd ask that you understand that your body's still recovering. Now is not the time to give it the beans, right? Not the Heinz baked beans anyway. Maybe just getting back into it, right? But we're certainly not wanting to go all out. Clara, could you click the next slide, please? So if we're going to deload and we're not going to give it the beans, like what should we do is what you're asking. I always feel that now's the perfect opportunity for you to sort of re-standardize your form on absolutely everything. No doubt in the last few weeks of prep, because you're chasing progression, your form on that hack squat, that tempo got a little bit skewed. The last few reps maybe didn't look anything like they looked like at the very start. So we want to be trying to have this, right, well, I'm setting up a tremendous off season here. I want to make sure, like, how does the success of any off season? Your ability to stay injury free, train around them, and continue to progress. So let's start at the bottom and realize, like, those extra plates on the hack, they'll come, but let's make sure that when we put them on, we're moving that like we want to. So I would start off a little bit lighter than absolute failure. So I'm not a huge fan of reps in reserve. It works, of course, but I would actually probably suggest that at the start, going like 1 or 2 reps in reserve, so that again, you're not like you're trying to wash away this neural fatigue. What's the point in ramping it right back up? The thing is, how do we offset that? Regain body fat. You have to regain body fat, right, to get healthy and to be able to, for the body to handle those big fucking beans on the hack squat sets, right? So you're going to start off by keeping your volume quite low, quite minimal for the first few weeks, right? Ali follows a model where he increases volume steadily, comes back down. That's not what I do, but what I'll tend to do is start off quite low, and then as my food gets up and I regain body fat, I might add a set here or there in places that I want to just get a little bit more, a little more tissue in. Now, I still feel that you should follow a progressive overload model, and what I'm talking about is this is like what you're going to do in that first initial like 3 or 4 weeks. This is what I'm on about here whilst you regain body fat. Small progressions in those first few weeks, but let's face it, those sort of progressions is 1.25 to 2.5k. That's always going to happen. Even if you're peak off season, you should be at that. But to start off with, like, remember, you're so amped up, you feel so ready to go. I'm saying put a 2.5 kilo on either side. Don't put a 10 or 20. Because you'll just, like, anyone that competes will tell you just want to nap all the time. When you start regaining body fat and you start eating a bit more, like, your body just struggles because it's trying to get back to homeostasis and balance, but it's just not quite there yet. So if you start like giving it, like going at on the hack, putting the plates on, you're just going to extend that recovery period. And remember, you've taken the body to an unsustainable point. We're trying to get back to sustainable, and that won't come about. But again, it won't come about through failure training. But remember, part of your identity, probably who you are, is about training. So get back to it. Don't see the people that say, "Oh yeah, I competed at a show, and then I just took like 3 weeks off training and gained 20 kilos." I'm like, how? What? Why did you compete? You know what I mean? We shouldn't need a motivation to train. It should be like, oh, if I don't train, life's a little bit shit. It's not quite as good. Just got to be disciplined. You maybe don't want to train a week after post show, but I'd recommend you do and get some blood moving, especially get some nutrients in the body. Next slide. I think I've got one more with training, or is that? Yeah, I thought so. So cardio is another one. And again, there's this going to be such a different opinion of what to do because of, well, right, Vaughan, I'm a bikini girl. I weigh about 45 to 50 kilos and I was doing an hour and a half a day. Vaughan, I'm a 100 kilo bodybuilder and the most I ever did was 40 minutes a day. Right. We've talked about the difference in increase in food. You then have to talk about the reduction of output as well. So can the guy get away with just going to zero? If he's really muscled, unfortunately, he usually can, right? I never suggest it, but I see it happen all the time. Remember, in peak week, you're probably coming down anyway. If you're doing shows back to back and you're ready, your cardio shouldn't be overly high. But have a think about it, is that it's got to stay in, right? We're thinking about this amount of fluid that we're maybe holding. One way to help get rid of that, to move blood, move fluid around the body. But at the same time, you know, if you were doing 15 to 20,000 steps a day, you can't just go to zero cardio and then putting your feet up and expect not to gain fat relatively quickly. So my suggestion would be, like, if it was 60 minutes a day, reduce it to 30. Take a few days off post-show, but put it back in, but then very quickly reduce it to 20 as well. Now, I wouldn't have it in every day. I'd reduce the total number of days down. If it's daily, you can maybe reduce it from daily to 4. Yeah, but if you went 60 minutes, and then you went nothing, you could see how, and then you had the increase in food, and then you overate on top of that. You've literally done a 180 with energy balance, and you've just skyrocketed it. Energy balance, energy in, food in, movement, energy out. You just skyrocketed it, and it's the positive energy balance that's going to regain your body fat. As I said there, after a few weeks, once you've regained a little bit of body fat and maybe you've begun your new rotation, because in that initial first 3-4 weeks, kind of go back to doing what you were doing. Don't start something new, regain that body fat until your body's in a good position. You're no longer sort of napping. Could you then begin your sort of new split? Now, if you are a guy using anabolics, your strength can really, well, you know, fuck that. Actually, I've known a lot of natural females as well. for their strength to surpass or get to where it was relatively quickly in their previous off season. Now, I'm not meaning like hitting PBs. With Clara, we took a little bit of a slower reverse this time around, so our strength took a little bit of time to get back up to where it was. But in seasons before that, it's increased a little bit quicker. But with a lot of guys, they said to me, like, within a month, they're like, Vaughan, I am hitting numbers I have never hit before. But that's been because they're doing a little bit of something with drugs that we'll speak about briefly. And like anything, like if you obsess over that load, you obsess over form, like I said, re-standardize everything, you will be able to see some new tissue come on fairly quickly, particularly if you're a guy that's assisted. For some of the natural guys and girls, excuse me, you're regaining the muscle you've lost in that initial stage. For a lot of assisted guys or girls, you're gaining new tissue relatively quickly. And that brings us on to the next sort of portion, which again, I'll try and briefly go over, but give you a little bit of value because there's not a tremendous amount of people in here that are maybe taking PEDs. If you're using lipolytics, which is a fancy word for fat burners, such as Clen, they can be stopped immediately post-show. In fact, usually they're stopped maybe a day out if you're a female, maybe 2 or 3 days out if you're a guy, because they will increase adrenaline production and stress on the body. Maybe if you're carb loading, they can be dropped. The big one that everyone asks loads of questions about is, hey Vaughan, I'm using T3 and T4, I'm just going to drop them immediately. And I'm like, that's the worst thing that you could do, mainly because your thyroid is, call it the master switch of the body, right? You've been putting something in there that's been controlling your levels above normal because you're trying to get a bit more fat loss. If you all of a sudden just flick that off, you then have no thyroid, natural thyroid production. And it's going to take a few weeks to bounce back. So if you know that the thyroid is one of the things that dictates overall metabolism, ultimately then drives, say, fat loss or fat gain, muscle loss, muscle gain, you have zero production and then you overeat, you are way to gain body fat really, really quick. So what I'd suggest you do, if you want to know a bit more how T3, T4 works, just go on the website, read my article or listen to the podcast on it. But I dropped T3 and I'd keep T4 in post-show. And I'd keep that in for the first initial few weeks. Because remember, you're going to get, like, T4 is the non-active component of thyroid hormone, right? Converts to T3 in peripheral tissues. But what you'll allow by dropping the higher levels of T3, you're going to allow that natural T3 production from your own thyroid to start on its own, start producing on its own. Keep it in until body weight settles. That might be 4 weeks until you feel like you could handle food and you're not overeating constant labeling and body weight settled. Pull it out, hold your body weight for a couple of weeks, use a thyroid aid for something like 4 weeks, and you'll be absolutely grand. The thyroid bounces back really, really quick, from what I've seen from blood work and from using it myself. If you're using any like oral steroids, they can be stopped immediately. They will not be needed, except for Vaughan, which you can keep in. But if you're a female, you're not going to be using that anyway. But you're only really going to need them at the back end of contest prep. Any sort of estrogen management should be stopped. I wouldn't necessarily say immediately. Could say be reduced in that first initial couple of weeks as you come down, and then just sort of eased off. The most common one, and I wrote an article about this in a podcast, is what to do with steroids. Do you go TRT or do you blast? And I've done both, and I'll talk you through like the benefits of why one versus the other, and then why not versus the other. I think that for assisted guys using anabolics, like the both allowed for muscle to be added really quickly. It's just kind of in a how healthy state are you after each one. I did a blast after my show in 2020. I think after about 8 weeks, Ali will agree with me that I did not look in a very good way. And it was a big watery mess. But for me, it was the addition of nandrolone. Tests stayed quite high, if I'm honest. Your D2 derivatives, like your Mast and your Primo, they'll stay quite moderate to high as well to try and offset the estrogen because you maybe pulled out your estrogen modulation. You're going to get so strong so quickly, like unbelievably strong. So and see that want to like just put a bit on the put a bit on the bar, that can get fucked, right? You won't do it. You feel too amped because your test levels are still through the roof, and what you move for a top set feels like a warm up weight, so you will naturally put more weight on the bar. And what does that do? Increase your risk of injury, though, doesn't it? Simple as that. You get a lot of fluid pooling, lots of water retention, way more than you do from just overeating if you're an actual beginner. Like loads of water retention in your ankles, your lower back, maybe your face as well, which you maybe see here and in the not too distant future on this webinar. You can usually get up and above your off-season weight, your peak off-season weight, within about 8 weeks, like that, and be in a much better position condition-wise. Maybe a bit watery, but you'll be a lot heavier. Like I could never break the 120 barrier, and after my initial blast with Cal, I was 128, like literally 8 to 10 weeks post show. It's got to be 8 to 10 weeks though, no longer, because you're just continuing to smash health, aren't you? I would say, why would I use this? If I was trying to compete the following year and make some like quite significant improvements in a short period of time, looking to push quite hard, 100% I'd use this. But what you don't want to do is push it too hard, put health in a terrible position, but also then need a recomp 8 to 10 weeks post show. Next slide, if you could, Clara. So post show TRT. So this is where you would drop, and you're always going to need to do this at some point, right? So you drop everything down to a TRT. Was that the next slide, Clara? Yeah. Go back one. Yeah, that's fine. So go back to say you're on 50 mega test to 200 meg per week. Your health markers will improve instantly. You will naturally grow, still like fuckloads, off of more food, low stress, and better sleep. You will still get like almost as thick, if not thicker than you were post off season in a very short period of time. Your fluid retention will be much less. Like my blood pressure was horrendous 2020, whereas last year I was pushing up TRT, my blood pressure was in range. Like my ankles weren't like a fluidy mess, and I didn't get out of breath walking up a hill like I did the year before. No joke, my wife will tell you I was in a bad way. But here's the thing, like you can progress your whole cruise phase for those 8-10 weeks and you're still progressing, and all of a sudden you put drugs in and you keep progressing. Because if you're blasted, you get really fucking strong really quickly. You have to TRT here at peak weights. You have to then try and hold them for then an 8 to 10 week phase. So personally, I'd always now favour the TRT. It just makes way more sense in my head. It's going to sound really, really silly for those of you that are natural. It gets the TRT phase done. It gets it out of the way. And then it gets back to the exciting stuff. Generally, whatever you're doing, health steps will stay in regardless. You'll need more when probably in the TRT phase if you try to regain some health markers, but ultimately still need them to be quite high in the blast as well. Next slide, I think it's the last one, Clara.
That's mine.
Or is it yours? Right, okay, that's cool. That is it from me. I've seen there's been questions, but I've not looked at any. So any questions, drop them in there. I'll answer them at the end. Thanks for listening.
Right, we'll switch on to let me share my screen.
You should be able to, Ali.
Right, sweet.
I think if you just share yours, it should instantly stop. Or Clara's came off first.
Right, perfect. So I'm going to cover kind of the anecdotal experience of what it's like to have a bad post-show experience and a good one. So you're going to have to excuse, one, my hair in this photo, and two, how funny it is, but I'm going to start with this one. So this here, if you can see on mine, I'm in the way, but this here is 2 days apart. Now you can see how unbelievably water retentive my face is, which Vaughan's obviously spoke about. You can imagine my face was like that. My ankles and hands were worse. Now I'm going to go through, obviously this is a funny photo, but I'm going to go through why this is probably something you don't want and my experiences with it. That, by the way, was after 2 days of just eating what I wanted, which was a lot. Now, with this, don't do it, I guess, as I've said. The this is from the last contest prep that I did where I worked with Vaughan. I can't remember how many years ago this was, 3 or 4 perhaps. And as you can see here, I also am aware that people look at this and they'll probably think, well, that's not really that, like, it's not that bad. You've not like gained that much body fat. I'm a naturally quite like slim individual, so I'll go through this as we go, but you will see the difference between a good reverse and a bad one. So the main thing for me here, and this is some real good take home points for you, for anyone that does do If It Fits Your Macros, which we might speak about in a minute, but this wasn't a smooth post dieting phase. Like it was really bad, to be honest. Probably, I don't know, like Vaughan's always coached me, probably one of the, from a mental side, probably fairly bad. With how I was feeling and how I was dealing with things. And I know people think that coaches are all superhuman, but we all have experience in dealing with stuff in a good way and a bad way. As we've spoke about, you do need to gain weight, but you need to do it in a sensible manner, whereas I kind of lost any attachment to how I looked and wasn't that bothered about it and just kind of done what I wanted, which doesn't work very well. Now, with that, I personally think if you're on prep, you should be on a meal plan. But if you aren't, you can, don't get me wrong, you can still get lean. For non-experienced people, always stick to the meal plan. Now, what I was doing here was and as you can see, I got lean. I was doing If It Fits Your Macros, but I was having periods where I was fitting stuff into my diet, even when dieting, which probably weren't that sensible. Now, what that's going to do is it's going to increase your food focus. It's going to make it, you then think about stuff for when you finish. Whereas if you're on a meal plan, you're really regimented, it makes it easier. I wasn't really doing that as such. I was still sticking to a rough plan. Now, the other thing is, as I've said above, my dieting phase wasn't as structured, which, as I said, you can still get lean, but it was making my food focus a lot worse. So throughout that prep here, my relationship with food was shocking. My cravings were super high. Also, the way I was structuring it, my performance was poor. Which I'll admit, and also the way I was feeling. When you're super lean, your energy levels aren't high. Mine were even lower because I was trying to do things just so I could fit in a bit more food at certain areas. So don't do that. Now, with the main thing, and this is what I think really, really stands out for me, especially when you're working with clients. You've been prepping for whatever amount of time. Could be 12 weeks, could be 22 weeks. During that time, you are absolutely on the money. You do everything you need to. You would eat grass if someone told you to. Absolutely nail it. Then it gets that end, like finish line, and it's like all hell breaks loose. All those little things you were doing previously, you just think, well, I don't need to do them anymore. Now, when you come out of that phase, if you can stick to as close to the routine as you had previously, you're going to be on for a winner. Now, that means, as Vaughan touched on, depending on which way you're doing your nutrition, actually setting it up in a way where you can still have meals out, but it's really, really structured in between. Because, and I will get into this on the next slide, how you feel if you don't do your reverse diet well isn't great, and then it can take a long time to sort of recover from that. Other things that I think is kind of, from my personal experience, I think I probably should have stopped prep the show before I did, just because I think my head wasn't in it. That being said, the show I did last, I picked up a trophy, so it's 6 and 2 threes. But I think for me, I'd probably hit the stage where like I was still ticking the boxes, but I wasn't there. And that then made it harder because when I finished up, I wasn't really that bothered. So that is one thing as well, obviously speak to your coach about. Now, hunger signaling is obviously all over the place, but that's where planning helps. And this is something that I'm said below. Now, I booked a holiday for a week later after I finished prep in a 5-star all-inclusive hotel. Now, if you go back to my face here, we can see what happened. Now, that was after 1 day of eating. Imagine what happened after a week of me just doing what I wanted. So many people do this. So many clients tell me they're going to book a holiday the week later. If you're experienced like Vaughan, 3 weeks, I don't really see the issue with it. If you're someone that's not experienced, I wouldn't personally put yourself in that position, because one, you're going to spend a lot of money to go somewhere. You're still feeling the fatigue of prep. You're also going to be stressed from your ability to stick to eating okay foods. and you're not going to enjoy the holiday. I remember that being one of the most stressful experiences of my life, where there's loads of food in front of me. I'm stressed about eating it. Then I'm kind of just stressed about my holiday. You don't want that. So being smart with how you come out is very important. Now, here's some of the reasons that I struggled, and I'm sure some of you can relate to. If anyone's got any questions and go through them, just fire them in there. So with the prep, my prep was fairly smooth. Vaughan will tell you that I am a bit mad when I'm prepping. My brain goes all over the place. But with the prep in general, I had done some stupid things. So for example, I don't know why, and thankfully I have done this, so it gives me experience. I literally spent every day on the Stairmaster in the morning just looking at restaurants to go to, and I had a list of like, honestly, about 100. Now, I know people do this. You see it on Instagram. They've got like a drawer full of sweets. Why would you think that's a good idea? Like stupid things like that. Like your favorite Instagrammer does it, so you do it. Don't do shit like that. So I would also suggest, like, the last time I prepped, I don't follow any pages like that, so I don't see anything like that. Whereas this time I was quite bad for just looking at nonsense. Great British Bake Off was watched every single one on the Stairmaster. But when I came out of it, so I didn't have necessarily any emotional attachment to how I looked, but the way I felt, I was pissed off. I was confused at why I was feeling like that. There was a little bit of being ashamed of it, because obviously I am a coach. You should be able to, in theory, deal with that stuff better. Fatigue was super high from prep. Also, for a side note, I started running tests that wasn't tests towards the end of prep, so you can imagine fatigue was even worse. My performance in the gym wasn't great. Obviously, we know, as Vaughan's covered very well, that the first month or so, or a couple of weeks, is more of a recovery phase anyway, but my mindset wouldn't let me do that. And like, for me, as I said, it's not about the abs fading. It's about how you genuinely feel. Like, I remember like my conversations with people, like whether that was mates, the relationship I was in at the time, was quite snappy. I was quite like, cause I was pissed off at myself and the way I was dealing with the food, I was then getting annoyed at other people. Now that is something that people don't really understand until you've done it. As we both covered, or all of us have covered, like, don't worry if you mess up, that's totally cool. But I think just having plans in place to actually make sure that you're going to safeguard it a bit more is super important, and people don't speak about that. It's either people have had a successful reverse diet or they've had a bad one. There's no in between, and there is ways you can kind of save it. So the other thing is, and Vaughan will tell you about this KFC story, and this is the things that I mean. I went from following, as I said, I was on rough if it fits your macros, but it was still structured as much as it can be. I went from doing that to coming out of this phase where I just didn't really follow any form of plan. And I feel like if I had went into a meal plan, and it could have been something like I had 4 meals, the 5th meal was something a little bit more that I wanted to eat, or I had things like that, would have been a lot easier. The KFC story is basically, I was standing on the treadmill, Vaughan's with a client, he's just finished, he looks at his phone, he's got about 5 messages from me just saying, mate, I hate KFC, but I'm waiting to go buy a bucket. And he was just like, cool. And then I just proceeded to speak about KFC for about 25 minutes. Now, I genuinely, if you bought me a KFC, I wouldn't thank you for it. I don't like it. And that's what I mean by those things, your brain goes mad. Now, obviously me and Vaughan are mates, so that kind of was funny, but that stuff there is why it's so important to reach out to your coach and to actually understand that you will have things like that, but your coach, whether it's us or someone else, will be experienced in that field and they can help. The big one for me is, and this one, people are going to be like, oh, that's a bit mad. But again, Vaughan said this, don't go out Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. People around you won't help because they don't understand bodybuilding. They don't understand what prepping is. They don't really get the fact that you're lean. But when you're prepping, would you take any of their advice? No. So when you finish prep, I'm not saying sit in your house and don't speak to people, but be selective with how you do it. So perhaps every Saturday you're going to see someone, you're going to catch up with them, you're going to go for a meal. That's brilliant. But Wendy that works in your office who doesn't know anything about bodybuilding, that's going to keep bringing you cakes, you can say no to them. People might be offended, but your mental well-being and how you feel is more important. And like, I've seen this before, like people I wasn't even necessarily close to giving you stuff. I used to just put it in the bin. I'm not going to lie. So make sure you are being sensible with the way you do it. Because, for example, your friends, your family members, they're still going to be there in 2 weeks. So doing that is very, very important. Now, the other issue that I sort of went and have said this, like, I am a big food person, but I made my relationship with food worse by what I was doing. I've said that earlier. You can really stop that. Like, you control what you look at. I personally find if you're on prep, you should be prepping for prep. So when you're doing cardio, listening to podcasts that are actually related to what you're doing, you're going to learn something. You're actually going to keep pushing. I get it a lot, like where clients are like messaging me about this, that, and the other about restaurants and stuff. I get it. But I also think if you're doing that, you're taking your eye off the ball. You're not thinking about what you should be doing. You're thinking about what's happening at the end. And one of my big pet peeves is people prepping that are like, in 55 days, I'm finished in 55 days. Like, why do you think that's successful? You think about each day as it comes, and doing that will help. So that's stuff that I didn't do very well. As I said, obviously I went through it quite fast, but basically on the right here with my bed head, I had a hat on, by the way. I was not feeling good. Didn't want to train. I was lethargic. I didn't feel great, like in terms of everything, sex drive, energy levels, like attitude, like I was probably.
What was the time frame?
So this is where it's going to get really interesting. So the time frame between these photos here, this is 5 weeks, right? And this is 12 kilos up, I believe. I've not got the exact data, but I believe it's 12 kilos up. When you see the next reverse diet, when I do it better, you can see the difference in the condition I've held. And obviously that means more muscle I've built. What happened here was I ended up in this cycle of overeating. Then I had to, like, because I still worked with Vaughan, I had to then stabilize that out for ages. So it meant I had a long period where I couldn't really push my weight up, that I just had to stabilize out. Now, for anyone that's ever tried a maintenance phase, they are the worst phases on earth because you're kind of just in the middle of doing nothing. So without joking around and saying like, oh, do you see my face after 8 loads? Like, that is funny and I can laugh about that. But the main focus is, if bodybuilding is the thing you do and you love building muscle, you love improving, the more you can nail your post period, the better position you're in. Because if you mess it up too much, which I did there, you're kind of stuck. You can't diet it back down because you're not in the ability, like your body's not responsive in that state. But you also can't really push up because you've already pushed on too much body fat. So just really be careful with it. Another one that I'm going to say here, I don't know if Vaughan knows this, but I got into the habit of, I'll just eat a little bit more and do more cardio. Now, we all know that does not work like that. And also, you are highly fatigued doing more cardio. What's that going to do? Fatigue you more. So that's where it's just about communicating. So on to the next one. Here is how you reverse in a better way and a more structured manner. So these photos here are roughly the same weight, but the difference is, rather than it being over 6 weeks, this was over, I'm trying to do maths here. This was over 3 months. Now you can see that I'm still holding good condition. I'm not as lean because I wouldn't want to be, but I managed to reverse a lot better this time due to numerous things. Also, by the way, can I just say, everyone holds fat in different areas. If this was a back shot for me, I would look like I'd put on a lot more fat. So don't look at this and think, oh my God, I don't look like that. It's not really the way it works. Also, steroids. I've got a little bit of muscle. If you're a bikini girl, it is harder. Now, I've said the same time, by the way, it's not a checked earlier. What did I do differently? Now, the main thing was, the first time I prepped and I messed it up, I kind of prepped, finished, everything finished. I didn't really have a goal in sight. I was like, oh, I'll just take a couple of months. Now, I understand why people do that, but I think it can be quite hard to regain consistency. Whereas this time, I was coming out of prep and I was like, I am going to nail this phase to build muscle. Now, I knew I needed to do it because I've been injured as well. For anyone that's followed me for long enough, throughout the dieting phase here, I had an injured lat, still injured, but I felt like I owed it to myself to actually nail it. So what I'd done was, and funny story, my coach at the time, I actually done a shoot this time, and he said, go out for a meal, enjoy yourself. I got home, I had a protein shake, I fell asleep. I woke up in the morning, I wasn't asked about food. I did go out for food at night, but because I had bulletproofed all the things that I had done wrong before, genuinely, I could have stuck to like a meal plan and wouldn't like the off-plan meals for me were actually more just to see people I wanted to see rather than the food, which is mad when you think about it. Because if you take 3 years before, I literally was getting told at a buffet to stop eating. That did happen, by the way. Don't ever do that. So what I did on this one was I stuck to a more structured plan. I would then have exciting foods here and there, but it was when they weren't, the food wasn't a reward. As I said, it was more to socialize, see people want to see. Also, if I overate, it was a bit, but I didn't make up for it. I just overate, cool, on to the next day. Now, with the other thing that I said before, with the if it fits your macros approach, you will see people doing this, but if you look at top level people, I won't quote them all because there's so many, the ones that do the if it fits your macros approach on prep, it's not if it fits your macros. It's just that they rotate foods around. It still looks like a structured meal plan. Now, that's what I've done. My food focus was zero, and I mean zero. The main thing was when I was on the Stairmaster, when I was doing my cardio, I was using my social media for business, replying to clients, replying to people that had inquired, and also looking at things that I wanted to see, whether that was, it could be movies, by the way. I'm aware that that's not going to affect anything, but I was looking at things where I could learn. That's what I mean. So that instantly is going to make your prep more successful. The big one here, and I think Clara would be more specialized in this, but a lot of the time people at the start, you're just eating because you want to eat. And then it becomes that thing of you're eating to punish yourself because you messed up. And that cycle is, and I've seen it before, I've been part of it before, it's very difficult. What I done this time was I knew that when I was eating food that wasn't on my plan, and by the way, I am not, like, I still messed up. I just mean in general. When I was eating food that wasn't on my plan, I was doing it in social events where I was seeing people I wanted to see. That way, the food came second. I just wanted to spend time with people that perhaps over that dieting phase I hadn't seen, I wanted to catch up with. This does not mean that all I ate was chicken salad, cream of rice, and rice cakes. I also don't like cream of rice. I just put it in there because, you know, bodybuilders do. But the structured setup is so important because I'm sure all of you can agree, or anyone that's dieted, right, I'm going to be structured, and then you eat one thing, and then next thing, you've ate everything. Literally, didn't have anything in the house. Like, the stuff on my meal plan was there. I didn't go look on delivery every 5 seconds. Now, that's just because I actually set it up in a way where I didn't need to do that. And having that thing there, because remember, even if you nail, say you come out your post show period, in 2 weeks you've been brilliant, but you go see your auntie and she's made 50 cakes. Nobody on earth is going to be in the position where they can't eat some of that. They will eat it. So setting yourself up in a position where you feel good is very important. So Vaughan said when you kind of hit homeostasis, when you're stabilized out, that's where you would drop out T4. That's also where I feel that you can actually start to enjoy the meals out more. So I think people think about, like, I'm finishing prep this day, I'm going to eat everything in sight here on this week. Personally, I think that's a bit of a poor approach. It will happen. You need to eat stuff here and there, but trying to actually have 2 weeks afterwards where you're just bringing your calories up, eating food that's going to help you, it's going to energize you, you're not going to be like really struggling with digestion, will then help you, because when you get to the period where you feel like hunger's dropped down a little bit, when you go eat a meal, you'll enjoy it. I can tell you, if you go to a restaurant and you eat stuff and you eat a lot and you're still hungry, you're pissed off. So then really, is that an enjoyable moment? No. So more structure. Having the goal in place. So obviously I wanted to build more muscle. I knew I needed to, and I knew that if I messed up too much, you limit the ability to do it. Also, just for a side note on this, post prep, I actually had a real bad fatigue buildup where I had to deload, like, I think out of 10 weeks, I deloaded 5 weeks. Like, it was like every second week, like Carl had to keep deloading me because I was just messed up. I kept getting exertion headaches as well. That may have made it a little bit easier for me to stick to the plan, but that does go to show you just at what state your body's in after you've pushed a hard dieting phase. So just make sure that you've got a goal in place and your effort matches your goals as much as it can. Now, there will be points where you slip up. That's fine, but that's where just speaking to your coach. I think with that one as well, my communication with my coach was very good, but make sure if you do overeat, let your coach know straight away, because we're here to help. And I think a lot of people miss that, where it's like a week later, oh, here's what's happened. Now, it's all good, it will happen, but it's quite hard to then give you different things to actually try. So as you can see here, this is how you don't reverse. Or if you really want to go up here, this is how you don't reverse. That, by the way, that in person was a lot funnier. And this is how you can actually nail it a lot better. The big take-home points from this is, on the previous slide, I felt like shit. On this slide, I felt my body confidence was still good. I was smashing the gym, but I also had energy. On the other one, even though I was overeating, it's not as simple as you eat loads of food and your energy levels come up, because if you're eating shit food, it's not going to work like that. So that is the big thing I think you have to think, like how much better you feel if you actually can come out of it nice and easy. Now, there's obviously a lot more to it than that, but this is with the sort of like me using myself here. I could have used clients. Some of them did give me permission. I think it's a little bit easier with myself because I can tell you exactly how I was feeling. The other thing, just because if you are struggling with it, there's always other people that have struggled. Now, not all of them will give you good advice, but if they're a coach, they should be pretty good with telling you, like, here's, yeah, I understand, I've been there. Here's how I dealt with it. Doesn't mean that way will definitely help you, but the more tools you've got in your toolbox, it is very helpful. So don't be stressed, scared, worried, pissed off. Try and actually reach out to people that are there to help, because honestly, it helps. So that is everything on there. End of the slide. If you've got any questions, we'll go into that next.
I think Clara can probably be best suited to message to answer
One
about binging and that, and then just we've got maybe like 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes, so we could go through those ones.
I'll try and be brief. But yeah, the question reads, how do you overcome losing the vascularity and the idea that you're no longer a hardcore dedicated individual, or at least not looking like one? I guess coming back to some of the points that I discussed earlier, it's sort of by broadening your identity and like not necessarily defining yourself. Like even if one of the legs under that identity table is bodybuilder, being shredded doesn't make you a bodybuilder. Like bodybuilding is defined by bodybuilding, not by being good at dieting. That doesn't make you a better bodybuilder. Obviously it's really challenging, but being dedicated, you can pull that into other things. So that quality is something that you have, not something that just shows up in bodybuilding specifically. With regards to go for it.
With that one as well, Clara, I think it's also because that was a female that asked that. So it's also remembering that, so like bodybuilding, if you go look at any top level bikini figure wellness girls, they will reverse in a way where they are not caring about vascularity. So like if they're doing that and they're top level, you've got to remember that why do we need to have that association with that's what's successful? Because remember being stage lean is cool for photos, but that doesn't define bodybuilding, because the majority of your time in bodybuilding is spent in the gaining phase.
Absolutely. I think that ties in quite well to the third question, actually. Asking, how do you solve the binges? I feel people think I am so disciplined, so there's so much pressure, and then when no one is there, I just binge. And I know I've already failed to carry on, and partly as punishment for failing / damage done now. I totally hear you. Like I've been there a gazillion times before, and I think it's remembering in that instance that it's like other people's expectations. Like we really need to kind of bracket that. And again, going back to the identity, but even just like understanding that you're human. So if you think back to the building blocks of self-compassion, this is where you really need to understand that it's perfectly normal that people aren't going to value you less for being human and gaining body weight. I know it's incredibly difficult, but in that moment of feeling like a failure, it's really just pausing for long enough so that you're not attacking yourself and saying you're a failure, like imagining a bully really coming at you. It's normal to feel like that, totally, because ultimately we do get so much praise. I mean, society praises people for being able to get shredded. It's almost like everyone makes the association that if you're able to get lean, you're a good person. That's the way that, society works. And so breaking away from that is incredibly difficult, but just understanding that it doesn't define you and leaning into the things that do. So if being disciplined is an important part of your identity, that's great. You don't have to live out that aspect of your life just through food. You like, if you have a couple of days where you are more flexible, if you are struggling a bit more with food, can you maybe bring that part of discipline into another area of your life just to remind yourself that you are still able to do that? I know it's like a broad of an answer, but I've been there before. And yes, you will have, I mean, we all mess up our intuitive hunger signals 100%. It's, you have to. If you don't, you can't successfully get lean, because you will eat when you're hungry, and to get lean you have to ignore that. And yeah, it's normal to kind of go through those cycles. So it's very much thinking about how can you break it, and how can you stop the guilt and the shame fueling itself, because shame, if we attach to that, that's what essentially really like stops us from believing that we can change. And the antidote to that is self-compassion. So that's the psychologist answer to that question. I don't know if you guys want to add in anything on, Ellie.
Literally a new client of mine come on board, I won't name him, and a female last year actually, and both when they came on, and the consult pack had said I struggle with binge eating. And straight away, like before I even set them up, I was like, "Can you please reach out to a therapist?" Yeah. And they're like, "Oh, but I'm jumping on this plan," and I go, "Yeah, but you jumping on this plan's masking your binge eating." So I'd speak to someone, and I got a message today saying, "Hey mate, I just had my second session, and thanks for your advice. I wish I'd done it earlier." So I'd say maybe speak to someone. Understanding like our scope of practice as coaches is a bit limited with Clara, obviously, maybe different, but me and Ali, we couldn't necessarily handle that. But from a physiological standpoint, like your hunger cues, like your ghrelin is hunger hormone, and leptin is one that tells you you're full. They should have settled down after a few weeks post, say 2-3 weeks post showing to regain body fat. So you won't be eating, you won't have messed up your physiology, hunger signaling cues. It's more just you're not eating because you're hungry, you're eating for a different reason. But yeah, just thought I'd refer out with the binging.
That's a big one as well, which Vaughan has covered, and hopefully people, if they watch this afterward, listen to that. Bodybuilding isn't going to help change those old habits that are there, and I think a lot of people try it.
Yeah.
If you're prepping when you have those underlying issues. And by the way, also I see a therapist, doesn't make, not for those things, but for other things, like it's a very rewarding experience. So that stuff, like you do have to watch with it, because it's different if you've got them already there.
Yeah, 100%. I think like a lot of people, because the behaviors that like I said at the beginning, bodybuilding requires us to be rigid. It requires us to take on behaviors that ultimately could present as risks. So making sure that before you even enter or consider a prep, that you've done some of that groundwork is really important. From a personal experience, when I started working with Vaughan, I was really struggling with binge eating and sort of like binge restrict cycles. And what working with a coach allowed me to do was take that time to do some of like structured self-help stuff. But even then, like I've started working with a therapist recently, again, nothing to do with eating necessarily, but making sure that I remember I said to Vaughan, like in my first prep, because I was still working through that, I said, if at any point I see any red flags, we're stopping this prep. Like I don't want to go ahead with it. So being very aware of it, not being afraid of reaching out for help. And, if you don't know who to ask anyone who you think might be able to point you in the right direction. Personally, like if you don't mind the plug in here, I do, like as an exercise psychologist, I consult with people who have competed in bodybuilding and come out of that phase too. And I also work with coaches who want to learn more about these things and sort of applying it to their clients. So the scope is there, there's so many different people that you can work with that can support you through that. And you're 100% not alone, because if it was an isolated experience, we wouldn't be hosting a webinar on it. It's, it's so common. So don't be afraid to share it.
Yeah, that's cool. And I would say there's any other coaching company in the UK that's got a Clara under their brand. So yeah, if you're watching this, take advantage of that. But guys, just wrap up there. And listen, if thank you for joining us. We'd much appreciate it if you could spread the word. If you want to pop something on your Instagram story, please do. That'd be great. If there's any follow-up questions for any individual one of us, please just do. I'd say drop us a DM on Instagram. They are always open. But as a final thought, guys, if you are prepping this year or in the future, you're watching this, we do wish you all the best. We hope that some of these things that our own experiences and whatnot can help you in that really crucial but also really hard post-show phase. And if you watch this and you're struggling, please reach out. We'd love to help. If you watch this and you thought, wow, that really helped me in my post-show period, please tell a friend, pass on this knowledge, because we're all in this together. So yeah, we appreciate you coming on, guys. I'll end it there and hope you have a good evening. We'll catch up soon.